SMSL is on it again. Watch it, guys, because they're after your pockets. Well, hi and welcome back to my channel. What we're having here today is yet another very affordable SMSL integrated amplifier. And it costs $280. It's a little bit different than the one that I've already reviewed, SMSL DA-9, that I still have here. But I'll start by quickly going through connectivity. So on the back here we have two analog inputs, meaning one pair of balanced XLRs and one pair of single-ended RCAs. If your DAC possesses XLR balanced outputs, I suggest to use that one, because it sounds a little bit cleaner, tidier, more energetic. But if not, RCA inputs are pretty great too. And then we have two digital inputs. First one is USB. And it is a little bit weird because, as you might see here, it's an USB-A port. And that one is usually used on PCs or in digital streamers in a form of storage USB or maybe output USB. When it comes to DACs and integrated amplifiers with DACs, usually USB is in a form of USB-B port, which is like a little bit bigger, more square-like looking. And that's weird because if you used any other DAC or any other amp and you already got any USB cable, it will be USB-A to USB-B. And you cannot use that one here. You'll have to get another cable or some sort of adapter. I suppose it's a space-saving measure, but I would definitely prefer to see like normal, typical solution. I never like when manufacturers opt for something that's unusual. It always makes our lives just a little bit more difficult than when they actually go with the flow and do what everybody else is doing, like following the standard, or at least unwritten standard. Other than that, we have a connection for Bluetooth antenna, meaning that you can connect your music to this amp wirelessly. And I'm quickly going to say this. Using digital inputs on this integrated amplifier is not the best possible solution. I find them substantially inferior to analog inputs. Of course, that means that you don't have to use external DAC, but in my opinion, this integrated amp is really good and good enough to justify investment in a really decent external DAC. And I would easily recommend a DAC ranging from like $200 to $300, something along the lines of SMSL SU8S or maybe topping E50. That way you could hear what this amp can really do. Using its own internal digital to analog converter, you definitely limit the sound fidelity that you'll get out of it. But when it comes to outputs, we have typical speaker binding posts that will accept banana plugs, spades, and bare wire. That said, they're quite small. So, what can I say? Banana plugs don't go all the way inside. Spades, you better use smaller ones, because if you use really big ones, it will be very cramped around these binding posts. And the same goes for bare wire. If you use that option, be sure that you don't go with really thick ones, because they will not fit. You can trim them a little bit, of course. But all I wanted to say here is that binding posts, they look sturdy and of a decent quality, but they are smaller than usual. They're not like a full-sized binding posts that you would find on a traditional big integrated amplifiers. So that would be all about connectivity. Now I'm going to attach it to the power and switch it on. In the front, there's not much to talk about, really. There's one volume knob that doubles as a button. It's clickable. There's an LCD display. Okay, it's not turned on yet. Okay, you can see now it's powering on. Okay, just before we continue talking about the sound, let's quickly go through settings and what you can do with this SMSL amp. Now, of course, you can choose inputs, balanced, unbalanced, Bluetooth, USB, and back to balanced ones. But when you enter the settings, here you can see again choosing inputs. We already covered that. Then next one is EQ. Now you can use it in a direct mode. That's the cleanest, clearest audiophile way where nothing is being altered. A tone is engaged automatically when you actually alter bass in really fine steps of 0.1 decibels, or treble, again in those same fine steps. But continuing to EQ, one of the more interesting ones that you can engage is called SDB. It resembles quite a lot to old loudness effect on traditional Class AB amps. Everything sounds just juicier and punchier and it's more in your face, but you do lose a little bit of details and fine, clear, crisp edges and things like that. But try it, it's really fun. You can always go back to direct, if you're a true audiophile, that is. Just kidding. The rest of them you can try for yourself. I'm not going to ponder much here. I'll just quickly show you what else we have here. Soft clipping. So that's basically prevention of clipping. I keep it at off because I'm not sure if it adds any processing to the sound or not, but I'm never cranking the volume so high that I feel that I have to use soft clipping. If you're like a party maniac, just switch it to on and that's it. Next, dimmer and brightness. So dimmer is a really useful function. It's automatic display off. I'll show you how it works. While we talk, we will need to wait only 5 seconds for display, okay, here it goes, to turn off automatically. I love this function. I simply love it because I don't like bright LCD displays. I listen to my music quite a lot in the dark. This is my favorite function. Everybody should implement it. Last one, brightness. As you can see, you can change it in several steps. The lowest one is really, really dim. So if you don't want it turned off automatically, you can just handle it this way. Oh, and of course, volume. I didn't cover that. You can change it. As you can see, 70 is the maximum. Most of the time, I listened somewhere around 30 or 35. For my LS50s that are 85 decibels sensitivity, that's really not that much sensitive. One step change is fine enough. I feel that I have fine control over the volume, and basically that's it. And when it comes to the specs, I won't talk much about that, because you can find that anywhere. You can Google that, it's easy, but you cannot Google how it sounds, right? Anyway, it has enough power for most of your needs. It has like 40 watts into 8 ohms and 80 watts into 4 ohms. It's quite powerful. And when you actually hook it up to your speakers, you feel that. For example, I hooked it to my CAF LS50s that are quite insensitive with only 85 dB per watt. And I felt that I do have enough power and enough kick and enough dynamics coming from them, which is not the case with many integrated amplifiers, especially at this price point. A lot of entry-level, I don't know, Onkyos, NADs, and so on, they feel a little bit sluggish. They don't really have a firm grip over these heavy loads, such as LS50s, but this little SMSL had no problem driving them. So let's talk sound. If you already watched my SMSL DA-9 review, you might think, well, it's almost the same product. It uses exactly same Class D modules. It's coming from the same company. It's just a little bit bigger and it has digital inputs, and that's the only difference. Well, it's not really. It does sound different too. Why? How? I can only speculate. I suppose a lot of that is coming from the power supply that's a little bit different. Because Guys, power supplies are half of integrated amplifiers. And in most amplifiers, power supply is usually more than half of the volume inside. And it's quite often more of the half of its price. Those capacitors and transformers and everything used inside to actually stabilize the power that's going to feed the circuitry that is amplifying the signal, that's like half, at least half of the amplifier. And by knowing that, you can probably guess now that two products can use exactly same amplification modules, but they can definitely sound different only because their power supplies are different. So all that said, how does AO200 actually sound? To put it shortly, it sounds really good. And same as DA9, actually unexpectedly good when you consider its price. And it starts with detail retrieval. Like, detail retrieval is great. And then dynamics and drive that you feel when you use this amplifier, it's again really great. Everything is rich sounding, rich with details. Edges are clean and crisp, and they're energetic too. And there's a lot of drive and a lot of energy in that sound. Soundstage is put quite forward, and you don't have to hunt for those details. Everything is really present, it's really there, it's laid in front of you. Now, soundstage is pretty wide and front forward. It doesn't have much depth. It's decent, don't get me wrong. It's not like completely flat sounding. It has decent depth, but it's not like the best amp regarding that. But the soundstage does feel wide and big, and everything is up front and forward sounding. And that's quite exciting. But tonally, I feel that this amp is not really completely neutral. For example, bass line and mid bass are touch warmer than I would consider neutral. They're a little bit oomphed, but not by much. It's actually a really good balance of a bass line that sounds good and punchy and exciting, but never overwhelmingly so. It just has a touch of warmth added. Mid-range, on the other hand, is a little bit dry. So what do I think about that? Well, for example, that upper mid-range part, that presence part, is really present. You hear a lot of huskiness, a lot of details. If a voice of a singer, for example, is sandy, you'll definitely hear all of that huskiness and sandiness. But when it comes to like being full and juicy, it's not that. If you want to feel the chestiness from vocals, it's not actually the champion in doing that. And I feel that like some part of the lower mid-range or something like that is a little bit recessed. And then the highest spectrum is again quite extended. It has plenty of details. It's not emphasized, but it's also not rolled off. It's just pretty damn good highest spectrum. And if you put all of that together, as I explained, really good detail retrieval, really good dynamics, really good drive and punchy bass line, present mid-range, but slightly drier, and like great extension in both bass and highest frequencies, this is one mighty good sounding amp when you consider its price. But no impression is really complete without few comparisons. And I'll start by saying that AO200 actually sounds better than most amps I've ever heard at this price point. Especially those traditional ones. And when I say traditional, I don't only think Class AB amps, but I think amps that are coming from old brands, brands with long reputation, with a lot of commercials in traditional hi-fi magazines and so on. So if you spend the same amount of money on something like Onkyo, Yamaha, NAD, etc., etc., you're almost certainly going to get a lesser capable amplifier sonically. It will sound more muffled, more congested. Tones will not be as well separated and spread. So AO200 will basically sound better in every way that we can speak of, like dynamics, drive, punchiness, detail retrieval, and so on. So just few examples. NAD D30 V2 that I reviewed here on this channel. It's more expensive than this one, and it doesn't sound as good. It's just smoothed, warmer sounding, but less resolving. This SMSL offers tones that are separated better, layering is better, edges are crisper and cleaner, and it has more details overall. For example, Yamaha WXA-50 is a little bit closer to this amp. It has pretty good detail retrieval, but it's a little bit leaner sounding than this one. It doesn't have the same amount of kick and juiciness as AO200. It's really not far behind, but it's substantially more expensive. It's like twice the price of this one. And finally, probably the most fierce competitor is SMSL's own DA-9. And I told you in the beginning that even though they come from the same company and they are using same amp modules, they don't sound the same. So what are the differences? Well, first of all, DA-9 has leaner but quicker sounding bassline, while AO200 has fuller, warmer, and slightly gruntier bassline. And I personally prefer the bassline on this one, but I know from experience that most people actually prefer slightly warmer and bassier presentation. So I do believe that most of you would prefer this one. I cannot claim that. And when it comes to the mid-range, both of these are highly detailed. DA-9 sounds really analytical, it separates great, and to my mind, it has just a little bit better balance in the mid-range. I feel that AO200 is focusing more on these upper mid-range registers. And often it sounds more detailed because of that. Things that I mentioned before, like listening to husky vocals, it sounds even more husky and even more present in space, just like in front of your speakers with AO200. But to my mind, to my ears, DA-9 is a little bit more tonally neutral. It just, everything blends a little bit better. And highest spectrum is really similar, so I wanted to focus on sound staging. Again, AO200 is more forward sounding, and it even sounds a little bit wider and lusher, like there's more of everything. It feels closer to you. While DA-9 is somewhat narrower sounding, but it has a little bit deeper sound stage. It pinpoints things on the sound stage somewhat better. But, as I said, AO200 feels more forward, things are closer to you, and noticing things in the sound stage is a little bit easier because everything is like, oh, here it is. While DA-9 will stretch that sound stage a bit, it will position things more realistically in like 3D space, but because of that, some things will sound more laid back and not as prominent, not as clear as with AO200. In absolute terms, I cannot determine which one sounds better. I think they're both equally good, and they both have their own set of strengths and weaknesses. If you don't compare them side by side, you probably wouldn't notice much difference and you would be happy with either one of these. Now I know, I saw a lot of guys and reviewers on the web claiming that these two sound basically identical. I do not agree. I don't know why they say that. Maybe they did not listen really carefully. Maybe they listened to them in a... I don't really know. It's not my thing to know or to debunk or whatever. But these two units that I have of DA9 and AO200 definitely sound different, and you can easily hear that they sound different. But all that said, both actually sound really, really great. And both are example of how new brands coming from China are actually rocking and shaking this old tree of established hi-fi brands. And at this moment in time, if any of my friends, or basically anybody, asked me, I have like $200-300 and I need the best possible integrated amp when it comes to sound. Not features, functions, and etc., but sound. I would immediately go to one of these. I would explain these tonal differences and let them choose. But I cannot think of any other old school, old brand amp that can actually compete with these sonically. And basically, if I wanted to have a noticeably better sound quality than these two little amps can provide, I had to revert to my Hegel H90 that is like 7 times the price of these ones. And it does sound more neutral, more natural, and even more spacious. But nothing else that's cheaper and that I tried couldn't offer significant upgrade to these. They're that good. Just a few years ago, before this Chinese brand expansion and this Class D expansion started, if I wanted to get this level of sound fidelity, I would look at maybe like 8, 9, even $1,000 price range. I would have to pay that much. For example, my previous integrated amp before I had this Hegel was Cyrus 8 VS2. And that's really an older model coming from 2006, but at that time it used to cost $1,700. Here in Europe, it used to cost like around 1,400 euros. In that year, something like 2006 or 2007, it won the award in What Hi-Fi for the best integrated amplifier up to £1,500 in UK. That's like, it was really expensive amp. And that amp is sonically comparable to these two. I sold it after many years of using it for 370 euros. That would be around $400 because it's a valued brand. Class A/B integrated amp with a lot of reputation, with a lot of stars in those big hi-fi magazines. So I sold it when it was like 15 years old for $400, which is more than these new amps are selling for currently. And these sound at least as good as that Cyrus. And why am I telling all of this? Well, I just want to put it into a context. Now, today, for like $300 or less, we are getting the level of performance that used to cost $1,700 in 2006, and it won numerous awards. It's that simple. And I don't think these need any more praise than that. Now, if you like this video, then click that button, subscribe so you can see more of these videos. Also, if you really like what I'm doing here on this channel, consider becoming a patron. That really helps, because all of that funding will go towards better lighting, sound recording, or just more interesting gear on this channel. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye!